What's a seriously messed up thing you witnessed as a kid that didn't seem so bad until you got older? My parents divorced when I was 3 years old because they started dabbling in some extracurricular activities together and my mom got hooked. Dad told her to get help or he was leaving, and she chose to move in with their special supplier, marrying him several years later. Dad got custody of us, and that was its own negative situation, though Dad never touched this stuff again, and neither did his second wife, so at least that part was better. But in the first few years, we still spent a lot of time with Mom in the house of good times. This included that during the summer, we were with Mom full-time, only seeing Dad or his family on Wednesdays and every other weekend. The first few years after the divorce were the worst using-wise, amongst my mom and my stepdad. In the autumn when I was 6, they had a baby, a little boy. I ended up being the one that cared for him when I was over there, as Mom and stepdad were often too distracted to bother to care for him correctly, and they taught me how. Anyway, the summer after the baby was born, I'm 6 and my sister is 5, and the baby's about 7 to 8 months old or so. My sister and I were outside playing when she complained that her toe hurt. My mom was awake, so I took my sister to her to tell her. My sister always had a very low tolerance for pain, and she became aggressive when my mom tried to look at it. Being in her elevated state, my mom ended up slapping a bandage on it without really looking at it, telling my sister it was going to be just fine. Sister still complained that her toe hurt a little bit, but we were able to get on as normal. Fast forward a couple of days, sister is still complaining. Mom has been awake for about 3 days. My mom and I cornered my sister in the bathroom and tried to hold her down to look at her toe. My sister was kicking, biting, and screaming bloody murder. Mom decided to just forget about it and leaves my sister with a still sore toe. She crashes from her high a few hours later, and we know she's going to be out for a while. Often she would crash and sleep for about 24 to 27 hours straight, but we were little, so we were sure that my sister is going to be fine. The next morning, I woke up to get the baby a bottle and tried to wake my sister up. She was literally gray. She could barely open her eyes. She refused to get out of bed or even talk to me. I was scared. I fed the baby a bottle and went to check on sister. Still gray, still not talking, still can't really open her eyes. I realized I needed to do something. I snuck into my mom's room where she and my stepdad were still sleeping soundly and stole her cell phone. I called my dad's mom and told her I thought sister was really sick and she needed to come get us. She asked me where mom was, and I told her she was sleeping and I couldn't wake her up or she'd be mad at me. She asked me to try anyway, but I couldn't get mom to wake up. Grandma said she was coming. She called my other grandma to come pick up my baby brother. Grandma got to us, waited with us until my other grandma picked up my baby brother, and then we went straight to a clinic at the hospital grandma worked at. Sister was so sick, she couldn't even try to be aggressive with them. I was in the room at the doctor's office with them to answer questions, because sister couldn't. I explained to him that she hurt her toe, and she'd had a bandage for a couple of days, but she wouldn't get up this morning. He took the bandage off, and I saw his face go pale. He told my grandma to look, and my sister's toe was blue, the color of mole. Her foot was bright red, and there were like lines, I guess, snaking up her foot into her lower leg that were bright red. I remember thinking they looked like spider legs. He looked at my grandma and told her this little girl needs surgery right now. So my grandma tried to get a hold of my dad at work, but he worked at a factory and she was unable to reach him. They couldn't reach my mom either. They let my grandma sign the consent because of the severity of the situation. She had cellulitis and it was spreading. She could lose her leg or even her life. I was too little to understand what that meant, but my grandma tried to explain the best she could that sister's toe was sick and they might have to cut parts of sister off to make her less sick. When they took her into surgery, that's where it got even worse. Grandma didn't know sister was allergic to penicillin, and since she couldn't get a hold of our parents, she had no way to tell the medical staff. Sister had an anaphylactic reaction on the surgery table. At the end, sister had to have her toe amputated, and she stayed about a week at the hospital. Grandma and dad helped to be sure that I could stay with her. And I remember we had a lot of fun with me pushing her in a wheelchair to the pediatric unit's game room, where we played a bunch of video games together while she recovered. I also remember the original doctor coming to tell me that I saved sister's life, but I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was little enough and crazy situations were normalized enough for me that I didn't question how serious it was. Sister's toe got sick. They removed it. She's not gray anymore, and sometimes this stuff happens. We're both now in our 30s, and I work as a substance abuse counselor. I've heard a lot of heinous cases of child abuse and neglect, but to this day I've never had a client tell me their neglect or abuse led to literal amputation of any of their children's body parts. It's the most insane addiction story I've ever heard of to date. I was in a self-contained room for special education for years because of my disability, visual. I watched a kid with Tourette's be forcibly restrained because he got up to back away from a teacher who didn't like his vocal tic. She called in the assistant principal, who decided to try to lift and carry him out of the room. He was just standing there, no reason for this to be done, and she did this maneuver where he ended up falling forward. His face hit the desk so hard it moved the desk. Instead of giving him aid, she snapped at him that maybe he shouldn't have done that. He went to the hospital and I never saw him again. I watched another kid get by a paraprofessional in the name of restraint. He was taken to the coat room, back room in the classroom, and I heard him hit the wall hard. I watched my best friend at the time climb a fence to avoid our teacher, who yanked her down and slapped her, and then turned to me and told me to go to the wall. My head pinged off the brick. My head pinged off a lot of stuff because of teachers. I was routinely grabbed, slapped, my hair pulled, my head held in a certain direction, screamed at, once quartered and beaten for not being able to see something. This back in the days when they would lump all the disabled kids together. They knew how to hurt without leaving bruises. They knew what to do to get you to not tell your parents. If you did, the punishments would get creative in the name of therapy. I witnessed a lot of verbal, emotional, and mental abuse. My 7th grade English teacher accidentally gave me a document he had written. It was an old floppy disk he assumed was blank. It described how he volunteered with a humanitarian group in the 70s that traveled through impoverished countries and provided free vasectomies. They eventually trained him how to do it, and he would do them even though he had no real medical training. This is not the messed up part. He goes on to explain that he decided that he wanted a vasectomy and to do it himself. He then described in very graphic detail how he did it to himself. He even said the date, like March 1st, 1981 or something like that. He described in detail cutting through things and how rubbery it felt. Again, not the fricked up part. I thought the story was hilarious because he wrote scrotum so many times, and I was a 7th grader. Well, I spread the story around to my friends. It eventually spread to a parent that shared it with the school. His wife, who was also a teacher there, promptly quit. Their son, who was younger than me, born in the 90s, also left the school. He kept his job. What I figured out much later was that his wife had cheated on him and had gotten pregnant, but pretended like it was his. The freaked up part is that he obviously knew she cheated, but never told her. He had raised the boy as his own. Once she realized he was sterile, and he's known the entire time, she left him and took the kid. Had I not shared that story, that kid could have lived his entire life without knowing, and that family could have stayed together. I was adopted due to being an orphan. I didn't get the social interaction as other kids. Fast forward to being adopted and meeting with girls and boys in the neighborhood. A rumor went around I was incapable of feeling pain or reacting to it. Well, 2 of these girls decided to test this. They took scissors and cut my face with the straight blades. I don't remember this. I only have what my parents told me and what I supposedly told them when I came home. According to them, my lack of reaction to pain or blood freaked the girls out. My lack of reaction to pain or blood freaked the girls out, and they refused to ever play with me again after. I was maybe 4 to 6 at the time. I did eventually learn to react to pain and blood. I was adopted after all. More so, I worked as a medic/corpsman in the Navy 4 to 5 years, and currently work with patients at a hospital. I've had my days of setbacks, the few patients who fought, bit, punched, and kicked, and those I couldn't heal, help, or save. I work daily with blood and pain so that patients feel neither, flourish, and one day walk through the doors upon discharge. When I was a kid, we took a family trip to Las Vegas and stayed at Circus. My mom wanted to get a magnet or a souvenir from Caesar's Palace, so we parked somewhere and went inside. I want to say we might have parked in an area reserved for staff, or it could have been for guests/visitors. That part is fuzzy. My parents didn't care regardless and had never been there. When we were walking back to the car and over a sewer grate, the kind with slots, I sneezed. A gruff male voice from below the sewer said, "Bless you." Being an innocent kid, I said thanks as my parents herded my brother and me into the rental car. Years later, as an adult, I watched a documentary about homeless people who live in the Las Vegas sewers, usually drug addicts and even women hiding from pimps. In it, when they're inside one of the sewer tunnels, their guide pointed up at a sewer grate above them and said, "You see this? This is the parking lot of Caesar's Palace." That whole realization that I was there as a kid gave me whiplash. On the road with my stepdad, the trucker. Stopped overnight to rest at a truck stop. I was 7 or 8. He warned me not to let lot lizards into the truck. I'm a dumb little kid, so I expect to see crazy big lizards or something. What I did see was a woman go inside another truck, come back out sometimes later, squatted over an oil slick, mud puddle, and cleaned her privates. Then she went knocking on other trucks until one let her in. I still thought there were big butt lizards out there. So yeah, years later in high school, this memory replayed in my mind, and I realized she had been with someone and and used a nasty mud puddle to freshen up before going to another truck. I felt so grossed out that I blurted out, "Freaking nasty," slipped out of my mouth in class. No way I was explaining it to the teacher, so I stood up and saw myself out. There were some doozies that are too dark to share, to be honest, but one I still feel bad about is what accidentally happened to one of my best friends because of me. When we were 12 or 13, my mom was an alcoholic and an opiate addict, and when phones with cameras first became a thing, my brother and I thought it would be a good idea to confront our mother about her drinking by filming the way she behaved drunk and high, though we actually didn't realize about the codeine for years, which was a depressing saga of her noisily coming home at like 4 a.m., usually partially naked, sometimes wounded, breaking stuff in the house, needing to go to the hospital, being super mean, eating all the food, etc. So I filmed her, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but I think we both forgot I had taken the video at all. It was a very chaotic time, and she could be pretty abusive. Sometimes we would have to hose down our front yard early in the morning so none of the neighbors could see the blood she had tracked everywhere after hurting herself from just being so wasted, and then catch the bus to school like 2 hours later like everything was totally normal. A few days go by and I'm hanging out after school at my wholesome, normal friend's house, and I'm showing him a video of my cat being cute because we've swapped phones pre-Wi-Fi and 1 to 3G networks. This is how you showed people stuff, and then all of a sudden I realize he's gone super horrifically still. I go, "What is it?" He really quickly went, "Nothing," kind of frightened, and almost threw my phone at me because of how fast he gave it back. Years later, I suddenly realized he must have seen that video of our mom in a very frightening and also very vulnerable private state, which we had only ever intended to show her and nobody else ever. I actually did tell him mom was an alcoholic a couple of years after the video moment, and his general response was, at the time was, "Oh, is that all?" So I'm not sure how much of an impact this actually had on him. Hopefully not much, but I still feel bad that he chanced across it with zero context. And because he never said, I never explained, which I think would have made the video seem even scarier and honestly probably a bit perverted, to be honest. We ended up drifting apart towards the end of our teens, as kids do, but I actually saw him in an airport a couple of months after my mom had died, and I know he recognized me. But we hadn't been friends by then for more than 10 years, and I was so clouded by grief and trauma, to be honest, that I just looked through him and kept walking. He remains in my memory one of the best friends I ever had, though. My mother strangled me when I was 11. My takeaway for a long time was how kind she was because she wrapped a folded towel around my neck before taking me to X-ray. Kids will do anything to protect their image of their parents as good guys. I had this friend as about a 10-year-old kid who lived in a park trailer. During the summers, we would pretty much just roam the neighborhood all day or do whatever, and our parents would have no clue where we were. One day he decided to run inside to get some toy or whatever, and I followed. I saw his mom passed out on the couch, a needle in her arm, and this kid, who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, was just like, "Oh yeah, she's like that all the time," in the most nonchalant tone. At the time I was like, "Okay, grab your toy and let's go." Now thinking back, it just breaks my heart. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, reactions, and of course your own wild stories in the comments. And here's another video YouTube thinks you'll love.